Okay.
Eckert and his pal, he did tell me his name. His name was Max Grosskopf. Now, he was a Gestapo man, a high-ranking one. I don't know, he never said to what extent who he was, but that he was on the third floor, and usually when you're on the third floor, that means you are very high up. Not in height as far as floors is concerned, but in rank.
Right.
And because of our relationships and of our whatever else, I didn't want to ask him to tell me who he was. He didn't want to volunteer, and I was really not interested, because I said to myself, maybe it's best if you don't know. Anyways, whatever happened. He left a week before the Russians came in, which means that all this work was left to Hans Fritzsche now, because we still were there. He had to go to work every day, packing the Germans up, so Hans Fritzsche was in charge. The very last day, which was actually the morning of January the 17th,
45, I take it.
in 1945, Ilsa and Sigmund and I, we had it set that we will make our move in the last possible hour. And the way it was going to come down was all prearranged a few months prior to that. My sister, which I didn't say before, the reason she came and worked there was she did knittings. She did knittings, scarves, sweaters, even dresses. And she was also a seamstress for shirts. But in this particular instance, she was knitting a sweater for an officer who was a Wehrmacht. He was from the Wehrmacht. He was not a Gestapo. He was not a Nazi. Somehow, he was a liaison between the Gestapo and the Wehrmacht, and somehow, when she was delivering a sweater to the Gestapo, he must have met her and said, "Can you make one for me?" And he said, yes. So she took the measurements and so forth, and it seems that he had some kind of an idea, it seems, because at one time he says that his wife also would like to have something done, and that he has his wife in Krakow. And so he came to pick her up once to take the measurements, and while they were in the apartment, he said, here's the way it's going to work. My dad knew him too, because he's done the pelts for his wife and for him. And he said, the time will come that we will have to leave. Now, we have 2 keys here, or we can give you the key in the last minute. Let's arrange it this way. This will be the best way to know. If I come by or leave word for you to come and bring me my sweater, that will be the day my wife and I will be leaving. As soon as we get the sweater, you get the key, and we are out. In fact, she's already in the car, so to speak, so that apartment is free for you guys to hide in there. And that happened on the 17th, rather. And he came by, gave her the key, he took the sweater, and she said, now we have the key.
Key to stay in the apartment?
To his apartment at a particular address, which was, I would say, if you walk fast, within minutes, 8, 10, 12 minutes the most, 20, you go slow would be 20 minutes. And I was put in charge of loading the trucks at the railroad depot to put it in the railroad cars. In other words, I was put there in the morning. I had to wait for the trucks to come, unload it, and put that stuff and put it in the cars. Meanwhile, of course, they were being bombed by the Russians, And one bomb fell rather close by and shattered a couple of mirrors which were in the thing. And then finally, around 5 o'clock or so, the last truck came in, and the guy, he was a German small officer, but he says, "You're still here?" He said, "I thought you run away by now. You should have run away." I said, "No, it's too early." I said, "I can't run away yet." I said, "I need to go back with you." And so, usually, a Jew had to go on top of the truck. But being that this was already the last 11th hour, so to speak, I was able to sit with him in the cab. And we drove up, and I ran into the building, ran down into the basement, and my brother and my sister were still already waiting. She says, "You know, at 6 o'clock, we have to line up and go back to Helsloos. And we don't know what's going to happen." He says, "If we have to make our move, it's between now and, say, 5:45. And my brother, he was a locksmith as well. And most of the doors were sealed from the inside with keys and padlocks, but he had the keys to them. So that was all figured out ahead of time. Needless to say, it was minutes before lineup, and there was another guy, he came by, a Jewish guy, he says, "Well, come on, we're going to be late." And we said, "We're going the opposite way." He says, "Where are you going?" He says, "You're welcome to go with us." But he didn't. He didn't want to go. He says, "No, I'm scared." So we opened up the door finally. Well, I'm not going to go into the details. This is actually very... I cannot get into it because there are things involved which happened before, which come instrumental in getting out of there. So that's in the book. You got to leave some suspense in the book.
That's right. You're doing a good job.
However, when we opened the door, we saw it was by 6 o'clock in January. It's already dark. And you could see the columns after columns of Germans going by. You know, they're schlepping themselves out of the city. They're not the heroes when they came in. They were like on a brass horse. Yeah. Now they're just just schlepping themselves hardly. And we rushed ourselves. It was good because there still was a curfew. And when you have curfew, when you run, you don't pay, you're not suspicious. They know, the military police knows you're trying to beat the curfew, so that's all right, run. So that was good for us, to be running. And we got to the place, and we got to the apartment, sure enough, and we sit down and we took a deep breath and says, "Whew, are we here free?"
Yeah. So that was it. So what happened after that?
Well, between that and between we actually walked out of the building, a lot of things happened. But when we finally walked out, we were on the street looking at the Russians and people, and we looked at each other and said, "Okay, we are free. Now what? We have no place to go. Where's Mom? We know Dad isn't here. But where do we go? Where do we sleep tonight? I know this is morning. That's the 18th of January, 1945. The regular army hasn't come in yet. This was the spearhead, but they were in there with the tanks and everything. The Germans were already out, and we were walking the streets, and by golly, we didn't know where to go. So guess where we went? We went to Helsloos, where we used to sleep. We figured, well, at least we know we can go up there and sleep on the bunk. We knew where they had the warehouse with food. So we finally get to the main gate, and the main gate is wide open, and they have some Russian soldiers on guard. And I looked, there's one guy, he's standing there with his machine gun or whatever he had, automatic rifle on his shoulder. He's swaying, and the other guy is pouring himself some beer in a container from a barrel. They had their spigot in a barrel. They had beer. on a post. And then far in where the building was, there were some people mingling around. And at first I thought, oh, they all are here. Well, it turns out it was a group of people from the motor pool. Their bosses were very benevolent. They said, you know what? You've worked for us. Goodbye. And they left them. They just took off. They got in their trucks and cars and left. And they said, hey. So they came by there to look for food. So I found my friend, but the rest of the people of the 100, of the 98, they were gone.
Oh, no kidding.
Now,
they were liquidated.
Later on, we found out this, that when we left, when we escaped, the rest of them went to the assembly room, and Fritcher and the elder guy, Max, were standing there waiting, and they were counting. He says, we're missing 3. And Fritcher said, who are the 3? And Max says, they're the Knoblauchs. And Fritcher laughed. He says, they won't be back. He says, I wish them good luck. He says, let's go. He says, they won't be here. They won't be back. They're gone.
Wow.
And they came back to Helslow's at 6 o'clock, or 6:15, they finally got there. At 8 o'clock, they all were taken down into the trucks to the railway station, put on railroad cars, and sent to camps. Mauthausen was one of them, and even somewhere else. So out of the 100 or the 98 after the war, only a fraction of them came back.
They were gassed or murdered.
Whichever, yeah. Now, one would think, what was the order? I mean, orders are being given. Fritcher was at Pomorska. He had nothing to do with what we call Helslus or the jail. That was a different commandant. This commandant had orders, no doubt, to take all the Jews and send them off. Fritcher didn't know that. I mean, he couldn't have done nothing. He had there was about 18 or some Jews to send back. He could have said, well, stay here, but then again,
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Amazing chain of events.
Chain of events go in a certain way. There was, it continues. The saga continues. So here I am, we're free, are we free?
The 3 of you are free.
Yeah.
You knew where your mother was?
No.
You didn't know it that
No.
way?
Didn't know where she was, didn't know where anybody else was.
You knew your father was killed.
So now, of course, here are the liberators, and are they liberators or are they not?
Yeah.
The war is still on, because this is barely, now it's a couple of days past, it's January the 20th, and the NKVD comes over to see us, and they want to know why we worked for the Germans, why we're collaborating, and why did we work for them, or we had to. What if you didn't have to? What if you had refused? Oh, they would have killed us. Well, he says, would you believe that if everybody would refuse and they would kill them, the war would have ended earlier? I said, yeah, but we would be dead, wouldn't we?
For sure.
So, to put everything back into the perspective, now we are here confronted, and they said, well, we liberated you, you owe us. Now you need to go and join the army. The war isn't over yet.
The Russian army.
Polish army.
The Polish army, okay.
And we said, well, he says, do we have time to recuperate? He says, no. He says, you're going to recuperate in the army. And so there was one particular officer there, and he kind of looked Jewish. So we asked him point blank, Amchu, are you a Jewish? And he said, yeah. I said, well, give us a break here. Do we have to join the regular army? I said, maybe we can become like you, officers. go for the enchilada. He says, well, yeah. He says, we have a school. He says, but, we have to recruit you first. And you go on a mission, and then you're going to go to school. I said, okay, a done deal. You got to go.
What about your sister?
No, my sister, she didn't have to go. What she did a smart thing. She went and she got herself married right away to the gentleman who was with us all the time. He was the other car washer who used to work at nights and spend the whole day at Helsloos where she was. And they got befriended, very nice man, and so they got married. So they didn't bother the married people. And by the way, and they were the very first ones, because she when she was a young teenager, she was a Zionist. She joined the Youth Zionist Party. And all she wanted is to get out of Poland, get out of Germany, go to Palestine. That's all she wanted to do. And the time wasn't right yet, but then when she realized that she got pregnant, she says, we cannot wait, because you didn't get on a plane, you didn't get on a bus or train to go to Palestine. You had to do it in a secret way. You had to crawl over borders, over mountains. You had to sleep in ditches to get there. It wasn't a cut and dry deal that, here, I'll buy a ticket and I'm traveling. This was all done undercover, under darkness. This was done against the Arabs didn't want it, and the British didn't want it. The British were furious about it. They were catching all those illegal, quote, immigrants, and there were two routes, basically. Two routes, and one of them was even arranged by one of the guys who used to be in a motor pool. He was the first one to go to Israel and said, look, I'm going to be the organizer. I'm going to bring the people over the Alps. And there was one trip you could go. You leave Krakow or Poland through Czechoslovakia into Austria and Italy. And of course, you had to go over the Alps. There was the Brenner Pass. Yeah. So you go over the Brenner Pass, you go through to go all the way down to Italy to the boot, and you wait for a boat and go over the Mediterranean and get to Haifa. Or the other one was more by land. You had to go from Krakow to Czechoslovakia, from Czechoslovakia to Hungary, from Hungary to either Yugoslavia or Romania, through all those little countries, until you end up in Greece. And unfortunately, the Brits knew that one very well. They couldn't catch the people on the other side, but they caught them on the other side by Greece, and they would put them into Cyprus. On the island of Cyprus, they would imprison all those guys, all those people who tried to go to Palestine. By the time Israel became a country, they finally had to release them. There was close between 18 to 20,000 of those illegals who were caught. Well, my sister went through the Alps to Italy because she got finally stuck in Florence because she was too big.
Yeah.
And word got, they had couriers going back and forth because I needed to go too eventually. I joined the army with my friend, the same friend
Your brother?
No, my brother joined the militia. He wanted to join the militia for one reason only. He didn't want to fight Polish people because that's why they sent us into the forest in Lublin, because the reactionary forces were there and they needed to be rotted out. He wanted to join the militia because the militia was watching German prisoners. And he said to me, he says, I'm going to give it to them. I'm going to be the one with the gun now. I'm going to show them who the boss is.
I can imagine.
But not so, because he couldn't bring himself to do that. So he joined the militia, and then within about a month, he threw everything down, and he went on a trip. He went to the British occupied zone. He just went on foot. He traveled. He figured out a way. While I, with Chimek, was in the army, and while my sister and her husband were going to Palestine. So we all left.
Yeah.
And when we realized where they put us in the midst of, in the forest in Lublin, and when we during the night listened to the other conscripts, how they were talking about how they have to get rid of all the Jewish officers first, he said, we're not going to kill our Polish brothers. So we told the sergeant that, and he said, oh, we know that. He says, we know who they are. He says, we take care of them. He says, we know exactly what we do. He says, Siberia is a big place. He says, they're all going to be going there. He says, now, the camp we were in had no running water, and you had to wash yourself or take, there was a river about maybe a mile down the road. And that was on a Sunday. We picked Sunday. We tied our shirts around our waist and took the towel, and we went down the river. And that was quite a few years back, and we never turned back. We just kept going and going. But we knew, that they would be looking for us because, you AWOL from the army.
Yeah.
And when we got back to Krakow, they told us, don't show up where you live because it's dangerous. And then we had a place on Ulica Długa. There was a committee, or a Jewish committee, where they used to hang out. Everybody, if anybody was a survivor, you would go to this committee and you put your name on, who you are, who you're looking for. And somebody came and said, your mom's name is up there. Well, we couldn't go there either because they were watching that place. So it was arranged somehow in another place, and I finally went there, and they let me go in this room, and I walked in that room, and there was some tables, long tables, and some benches, and people sitting, talking very quietly. And I looked at the people, and I said, well, my mom isn't here. I looked at everyone, and this person who brought me in, and I just went to her like shaking my head.
You thought you would see your mother?
Yeah. And so I'm walking out, and I'm just about by the door, and I hear this faint voice calling my name. Oscar, I'm your mother. And I looked back. I couldn't recognize that woman. I saw a thing, a person, but that wasn't my mother. I mean, I couldn't recognize her. She, it's not that it wasn't a lifetime that I didn't see her. It was what? I mean, 3 years?
Yeah.
I haven't seen her. She looked like she came back from the grave.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I mean, it was
shocking. Oh, my God.
If she wouldn't have spoke up, it was horrible. Horrible. Anyways, so now we had to be confronted, I said, look, we getting out of Krakow. Now we got Mom, we got Rose, my cousin. I said, we got Chimek. The 3 or 4 of us were leaving. And I just left word with the people who were organizing the trips to Palestine. And I said, I'm going to be in so-and-so place. And when the time came, they came by. They gave me, he says, look, you're the sanest of them all. You're the group. You lead them. You go from here to Katowice. From there, they're going to tell you where else to go. Good luck. You're going to see your sister. You're going to be reunited with your mom and everybody, and so forth and so on. And we were on our merry way, and we got as far as Prague, Czechoslovakia. Politics sometimes wins out no matter what. Evidently, the Brits finally got through to the American government and said, look, enough is enough. You people are allowing them to use your camps, your displaced persons, they call them DP camps after the war. You're allowing them to use them so they bring those illegals into Palestine, and we've got problems with the Arabs. So we don't want that. So you need to close those things. So luck has it. We are the last group, and they come in the next morning, the rabbi comes and says, you got to go back where you came from. I said, no, I can't. How can I go back?
Oh, wow.
We're going to cross the border, they're going to arrest us, first of all. The Russians were that way. Why do you leave us? You don't like us. Well, let's find out who you are. Well, this would have been the end of it. So again, we're in a pickle. Now what? And from that point, from that camp to the border, was a mere 15 kilometers on a train. It's hardly anything. So another getaway has to be made, which wasn't easy, because here we're dealing now with American MPs. That's an entirely different story again, because how do you converse with them? How do you tell them you applied? And furthermore, they're the military police, and they're not interested in your problem. Okay. They've got orders, and you're going, buddy.
Could you speak English at that time?
No.
You were just spoke...
English?
Oh, my God.
Nothing. Nothing. But we didn't go back. No way. We managed. Again, it's coincidences. Coincidences. It's so many coincidences.
So what happened?
They put us on open railroad cars, you know, and each railroad car was guarded by one soldier, American soldier. And I was on that car running. At one time they used to carry coal on it. It was going very slow. It was wide open. You know, it had sides about this long. And
let me get where were you going? Back to the DP camp?
That was from the DP camp. We were going back into. They were going to send us back to the Austrian border, and from there, of course, they would send us back into Poland.
Yep.
So I'm running back and forth like a crazy person, because I can see myself. This is the end of the road. And I curse in Polish.
You were with your brother? Who were you with?
No, my brother. I was with my cousin and my mother. But my mother was on the other side of the you know, those cars are long and they make noise. And I was on the side where the soldier was and where my cousin was, and I was cursing really bad and in Polish, you know, and talking about the Americans are just as bad Nazis as everybody else, and I hear this guy speak up, very broken Polish. He says, to the effect that not everybody is, that I shouldn't be saying that. He says, but, you know, those are orders. He says, you know, he speaks a little Polish because he's from Buffalo, New York, and that his parents were from Poland at one time or another. And he said, when I told him, I said, you know, look, imagine if you're AWOL, and you know, it's not that I did it on purpose. I said, I don't want to be in the Communist Party. I don't want to be in that army. I said, I don't want to be in nobody's army. I said, I've had my share of being where I was. I said, I don't want to fight for them. I said, you know, look, sooner or later you're going to be fighting them, and I would have to fight you.
Wow. And
so he knew what it was all about. He says, look, he says, if you want to go, he says, I see scenery over there. It looks pretty good to me. He said, all I have to do is just turn my back and you do whatever you want to do. I said, okay. So when the train came to a stop, to a halt, I helped my mom and rose over the board. I winked to the other guys, and everybody came down. Only things he said, be careful. There's a lot of MPs on that station because we already entered the beginning of the station. All we had to do is that they had to change the crew up front. God forbid that they come from Prague, from Czechoslovakia to Austria, with a Czech crew. My mom used to live in Czechoslovakia as a young girl, so she knew a little Czech. And we had to hide here and there. We dodged the MPs. And finally we see this railroad guy going around with a hammer, checking all the wheels. And I said, ask him where that train is going. So she asked him in Czech, and he said, as soon as he's done, it's going to Regensburg. Now, Regensburg is in Bavaria, in Germany. And to me, it didn't matter where we're going at this point. There was another chance, because by the time we got to this guy, to this Czechoslovakian railway man, there were some other trains parked going somewhere. And they spoke a different language. Like they were Romanians. And I tried to tell them, can we get on the car? No. So we finally ended up on that railroad car, on a train which went to Regensburg, which is in southern Bavaria. And by that time we got on, it was dark.
The three of you?
Yeah, the whole group.
Okay.
My original group, except one. In my original group, Schimek Schwimmer was there too.
Right. Yeah.
But when we left Katowice, something happened. You see, everything had to be in a shroud. Traveling from Krakow to Katowice, we had to come in a small van without windows. And as we're going slowly, we hear the horn beam popped several times, and then there was a thud. And there was some commotion going on, and the next thing the door opens in the back, and we all have to come out. We're in there like sardines. What happened, the chauffeur, our driver, hit something, and he hit a woman, and he killed her.
Oh, my God.
And the police came. Now, by the time they ironed everything out, before the police came, everybody got out. Schimek went across the street. He said, I'm going to get a distance between you and myself. But I had to stay because I had everybody with me. I couldn't leave.
Yeah.
I couldn't leave with the whole group because that would have been too obvious. So I stayed. We didn't say anything. They took her to the police station. And then, an hour or so later, the policeman came in and he said, it's all straightened out. We found the son of the woman. She had some identification. We found him, and he told us the reason she got killed is she couldn't hear because she's deaf, or was deaf. So we got locked out. But meanwhile, the people who knew we were coming knew that something is not right. They came out looking, and they found us. And so they guided us back to the safe house, what they called it. So I'm in Regensburg, so Schimek isn't with us. And there they had a committee where you could get refreshed. You could stay for a couple of days, get clothes if you wanted to get, which we needed because it was dirty. We needed to wash. We needed to get some food. We slept. But they said, well, you cannot stay here because this is only a temporary camp. But here's a list. You can go to DP camps. You can go. One is in Feldafing, which is close to Munich. One is in Landau. One is all over the place. And I said, Feldafing sounds good. So I said, let's go to Feldafing. So they put us on a truck, and we went to Feldafing. And that was a DP camp. And we had barbed wire around it. and we had American soldiers watching us, and we had the buildings inside. There were buildings there were German. They used to train some German Nazis there. Feldafing itself was, as it turned out later on, it was kind of a town where rich German Nazis used to live. Villas and everything, beautiful lake. And so we got there, and the next thing, you go around in the camp, there's so many people, and somebody said, go into this hut because over there's all kinds of newcomers. And I walk in there, and the next thing somebody's calling my name, and I look around, and it's Shimek. Oh, he's introducing me to a whole bunch of new kids there. He says, this is Lolik, and this is Jerry, and this is Barry. And so we get to know each other. They all already have jobs. You got to work too. I said, okay. So in the administration, they always needed workers. And so you have to work. That means for free. You volunteer.
Sure.
And because I spoke German and Polish, they figured, you're going to come in handy. Every department was on hand. The total organization was the UNRWA, UNRRA. It was the United Nations Rehabilitation blah, 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 blah organization. And they had people working from every department possible, even the social department. And this one lady...
This was in the DP camp.
Yes. And she comes up to me and she says, in Yiddish, she says, you come in very handy because we need to find out who all those people are. She says, we know their names, we know where they were born, but we need to know more. He says, we have pre-printed questionnaires in Polish and in German. And it would be nice if you could ask those questions and write it in, because we need to know, did they have any schooling? Did they have any more relatives? How many were there? Do we know anything about their sicknesses? And whatever you see, you ask. And what you do is, you simply take one building at a time, you set up a little office, you make sure that they all have to do that. In order to get whatever privileges they need to get, they need to go through you, and you have to ask. So that took almost...
An important job.
Yeah, it took a few months. It was interesting, and I got to know a lot of people. Some of them didn't want to, but the majority finally did. During that time, the camp was getting bigger and bigger and bigger as far as people is concerned. And pretty soon, we had people sleeping in the hallways.
Most of the people Jews?
Everything. Every one of them.
Okay.
And you couldn't go out because... How? Now, as I was working, I kind of was able to, as you will see, I have some documents which I saved. Okay. And it said that I'm working for the camp and that I'm required or requested to go out ever so often. So I had my little pass. But the fact that people had no beds or bunks to sleep in became a bad situation. Now, the army, which was watching us, was all under General Patton. And he was a tremendous general. His achievements in World War II were just bar none. I mean, nobody could compete with this guy. He was a nuthead. When he got in his tank, he says, just follow the road. Forget about it. Just pass everybody by. And he did. But as a person, there was something else. There was something missing there. Jews he doesn't particularly liked. He didn't have much to say for them. In fact, some things he said was very bad. But that's in private life, his private life. He never said that openly. He might have said it in a private interview, but nevertheless, that's the opinion of a person. So there was a committee, and they suggested that it should be said that something should be done here. That either they have to take some of them out or open the gates and let the people go wherever they want to go. I mean, after all, we're liberated, we're free. So why are we still penned up?
Yeah.
And he said, well, this is the law. That's what the Army is doing. So it finally got all the way to the Congress, to the United States, and a guy came and inspected it and saw what he saw, and he didn't like it. So he went to the commanding officer, to the head, to Ike Eisenhower.
Wow.
And he says, I got to see it for myself. I mean, I cannot make no decisions. So on a sunny day, I was as far away from him as you are. He came in with Patton. Now, Ike was he was a wonderful person. He looked like a soldier, non-pretentious,
Yeah.
no boots. And he was followed by Patton. Patton had this helmet was shiny, it was all polished, and his pearl-handled gun hanging. He looked like a general. And the two just didn't, they just didn't fit together. But
Eisenhower was his superior.
He was his superior, and Eisenhower knew that Patton is very hard to control. He is not an easy officer to control, and he wasn't, and maybe rightfully so, because he shortened the war by quite a few weeks. And if he had his way from day one, the Russians never would have come into Berlin. Never.
Wow.
He would have been there first, long time before them. He wanted to go on and beat the heck out of them. Yeah, he didn't want to stop. He wanted to keep going. Anyways, within days, the order came that the barbed wire has to go down, the soldiers have to disappear, the camp has to be opened.
These are Eisenhower's orders?
Eisenhower orders. And Patton was replaced. He was sent to Denmark on different duties. Now, before Patton left, he made a comment, said that this is the wrong thing to do, that the Jews will leave the camp and they will start plundering all the German households.
Oh, wow.
And they no doubt will abuse a lot of them. And the army will have to come back in and no doubt shoot a few Jews to keep a peace and order. And in my book, I'm saying, well, none of the above happened. The Jews went out. They didn't plunder the Germans. They didn't hustle the Germans. In fact, the Germans got along with the Jews just fine. It's politics, and if you mix your own feelings with politics, put a sprinkle of religion in it, that's a bad combination.
Wow.
Very bad combination. We were free, and we didn't... Look, we had chances to get even with Germans, but, you didn't care. You didn't want to do that. You didn't.
You didn't want to.
To get down to that level? No. Absolutely not. In fact...
That's interesting. Yeah.
Interesting? I'll give you interesting. My mom almost died several times in the camps. And when they were coming back, when they were freed, and when they were walking down the highway, Rose and her friends and my mom, and they were pulling a small little wagon, and they had some food on it, some bread and some food which they got from the Russians. And going towards Krakow, they were going on one side of the highway, and on the other road, coming back the other way, were the Germans, women with their children and old people, and the kids were crying. They were hungry. They were asking for food. And my mom stopped and she picked up 2 loaves of bread or whatever, and she went across the highway and gave it to those people. This is getting even.
Ooh.
See, my cousin Rose, she says, you know, at first I couldn't forgive your mom, but then I realized that what she was doing was the right thing to do.
Wow. The human thing to do. Yeah.
Because Rose was on a death march, and there were German people who came out with milk and water, and the German guards knocked it down. They didn't allow it.
Wow.
So Rose then finally realized that, you know, my mom wasn't on a death march, but she realized those children are children. You know, they were not the ones who were fighting.
That's right. They were not.
You know, so, you know, the question many times they ask, did you get even?
Yeah.
You couldn't bring yourself to get even. If anything, I helped out. You know, I've seen those different hotheads. You know, oh yeah, you know, they slap the Germans around and pushing them and doing this. And why? What's the percentage? Is it going to bring your dead family back? Is it going to help to change their minds? If anything, it'll change their mind. I was on a trade trip. That's after the war in Germany. It was a long trip. It was almost like a 1.5-day trip. One of the trips. And there was a woman in a compartment. She had 2 children. And there were some other people sitting there, which were Jews. They spoke Polish, and they were very abrasive. Their behavior was really lousy. And it was so lousy that I didn't want to admit to them that I was one of them. And I just spoke to the woman, and she was saying that she's so scared.
German?
She was German. And I said to her, look, as long as you're sitting here, I said, you know, and have the children between you and me, I said, you have nothing to worry about, you know. And she knew that I was not German. I mean, I was German, but I had some food which Germans didn't have, and I shared it with her. And those 2 must have, I don't know what they thought, but I couldn't care less. But I never admitted, I never talked Polish to them. If anything, I talked German to them. And I would say something to the effect that it would instigate that, hey, don't go there. You know, it's none of your business. When we finally got the trip over, she said something. She says, well, you know, that Hitler was right. Because I know, she says, those were Jews. I said, well, maybe so. I said, but you know, do you know that Hitler might have been right, but so am I too, because not all the Germans are bad. I don't think that all the Germans were bad, but I think the majority of the Nazis were bad, really bad people. I said, and you think that they are bad because they're Jews? I said, well, you know, I have news for you. I'm a Jew too. And I was through in the war in the Holocaust. But did I treat you wrong? She says, no. She says, no, you can't be. I said, no, I am. I said, I am 100%. I said, I prove it to you. And I called those guys back and I talked to them. And then she realized, I said, I just want to make sure that you change your mind.
Wow.
Not everybody is alike. I said, you don't judge everybody just because they're all in one bushel.
That's right.
There might be 1 or 2 bad apples in a bushel. There always is. I remember when I go into the supermarket and buy strawberries, you mean every strawberry is good?
Good analogy. Right. It's true.
But, you know, life is teaching. People need to know People need to know people. People need to meet people. If you just hear somebody say about stories, yes, there are bad people. There are bad people everywhere. People in every walks of life, there's good and there's bad. You know, not every rabbi is glorified. Not every priest is glorified. There are bad everywhere. But, you know, you don't say all of us. You don't generalize. Generalizing is one of the worst things people can come up with. You know, the first thing is they mention a key word, and once of a sudden, that key word means everybody.
Yeah.
You know, it is wrong. It is very wrong.
It's true.
You know, you punish people. Instead of punishing people, try to get the things straight, educate them, and get them on the path to say, look, it isn't quite so. You know, many times, if I were to ask anyone, and I ask an 18-year-old fella who's a Jew, and I ask him point blank, look, pretend that I'm a Christian, and I'm asking you a question. I want you to answer it. Why do the Christians hate the Jews? He looked at me. He says, I don't know. I haven't got the answer. But there is the answer. There is the answer. You know, when you ask a Christian that, and they don't know it either. Because you see, somebody read my book. And then they wanted to talk to me. And I answered all the questions. The final question, they said, so why? Why did Hitler, why do everybody, as a rule, hate the Jews so much? I said, well, good question. So I figured I'm going to answer that question with a question. I said, well, it's the same way. Why do the white people hate the blacks so much? And she said, good question. And that was like maybe 5 years ago. And I said to myself, I need to answer that question. There is a question here which no one has an answer. Yeah, there are some answers. You can come up with an answer very quickly. But is it the real answer? And the answers can be surprising. It is very, very, very surprising. It is a combination. It's humane, it's political, it's religious, it's a very interesting subject which can be and is there to explore. And in my new book, in the epilogue, which would be about, well, it's short, but it gives you a pretty good idea what I'm talking about. And so far, a lot of people say, well, finally, we see the light, because it's something, it was there, but no one could put the finger on it and say for sure why. Why is it? And it is something, it was caused. It was not caused, it was caused. It's cause and effect. Okay? Yeah. It was caused, and the effect turned out to be what it turned out. So, when you see this, it has very little much to do with the Jews are responsible for killing Christ. This is not the important part in the hatreds at all. It's being used. It's like a cane to support your walk, but it's not the real. It's not the real thing. The real thing is economical. It has to do with the economy. But it was not caused by a Jew. It was caused by the non-Jews, by depriving us from all this, for the thousands of years by chasing us out and by taking away. And the only thing they couldn't take away from us, they can take away your money, they can take away your clothes, they can take away your land, your fortunes, but they couldn't take away guess what? Your brains. This is one thing they could not take away. And therefore, the Jew is forced always to use his brain, how to survive. Because if you're here today and tomorrow you're going to be in a different country, how are you going to survive? So he has to think. He has to work in ways that whatever he does, he has to be extremely good. Because if he isn't good, if he isn't better than the next man, then he's not going to be able to do it. He won't be able to earn a living. So what happens here? What does the picture tell you? If he becomes a locksmith, and he's a better one, then he puts the other one out of business. Same goes for any other trade. He's a better carpenter, he's a better tailor, a better shoemaker, he's a better farmer. He can produce better and more because he's got to try twice as hard. He becomes a better doctor. So finally what happens is they all are thriving and the non-Jewish population is not. So what has the government of a country got to do? Expel them. So yeah, they're good in usury, they're good in loaning money because they cannot spend it on land which they can't buy. They're not allowed to. So what do? The kings come, where do we go for money? Oh, the Jews have money. We get them a loan from the Jews. But Mr. King, you got to pay it back. Oh, we will. But when the time comes, well, he has to go to the pawns, to the peasants, and raise their taxes. And they get in an uproar, and they say, why? He says, well, I got to pay the Jews the money back. What do you mean, the Jews? They don't need the money. Get them out of here. The king says, I can wipe out my loan by just telling all Jews must leave the kingdom. Case closed. I don't have to pay it back. I don't have to raise the taxes. Everybody is happy. So now the Jews is up wandering again. Jealousy.
Yes. Yep.
Jealousy and more jealousy. You just look at the Nobel Prizes which were issued from day one, and it is embarrassing. Totally embarrassing how much the Jews have raked up. But what else can they do? There are people out in the world, they're clergy, the second president. You should hear what he has to say about the Jews in 3 sentences. It's something which should be in every school book. Mark Twain, a writer who says it as it is. And, he has written a lot of books.
Oh, yeah.
And what he has to say about the Jews is fabulous because he's unbiased. He says, look, yes, they're bad. But he says, but in comparison to the rest of the world, there isn't so many. So, yes, but look how much good they are. Again, in comparison, he says, they far outweigh those who cannot produce anything. So the question remains, even the clergy says, why is it? Is it? Oh, you've got from day one, when Abraham come to the scene, he organizes everything the right way because God tells him in so many ways, there's things, get some law and order here going.